Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lee Camp, and Wall Street is melting down. In fact, globally, the economic systems of our world are melting down. All thanks to the one and only Orange Man. I'm going to bring you in this episode. I know I covered some of some of the issues and some of the discussions about these tariffs. I covered them on Friday, but I'm going to bring you in this episode the real reasons, the deeper reasons for these tariffs, what the hell it is Trump thinks he's doing. And that's one of the things with like massive moves. It take a little time to digest. I don't feel like I'd fully thought it all out and read it all out and learned it all out and all that, all that good shit by the time I covered it on Friday. So I don't feel like I brought you everything that you need to know as in terms of what the hell is going on right now and what it is Trump thinks he's achieving. Because we all know that he and the economic people around him and whatever the fuck, they're not telling us the real reasons they do anything. And unless those real reasons were to somehow make him sound good, he might tell you the real reason that he, replaced the garden gnome with JD Vance on the in the White House garden. He might tell you that because it was really like, oh, I found him annoying, so I sat him in the garden. Like, but he's not going to tell you the real reasons he does just about any of the larger stuff. And so let's get into that. And it is not the reasons that CNN will give you. Absolutely not. But don't forget, everybody, click thumbs up, click share, click all the things you can click, leave a comment. Even that helps. Later, I'm going to get into more things about Gaza and Israel, ongoing genocide there, the protests this past weekend, and so much more. It's all coming to you right now. Let's go into some of what's just happened. So you know that before we get into the deeper levels, we know that you know that Trump increased tariffs on every country, including those that only have penguins. we talked about that on Friday. But here are some of the responses. Hong Kong's benchmark index has slumped 13%, its biggest one-day drop since 1997, the year Britain returned the colony to China. Taiwan's composite shed 10%. In mainland China, key indexes are down 9%. Japan's is down 8%. Early trading in Europe and France, blue chips are down 4 to 6%. India's stocks saw their biggest single-day drop in percentage terms since March 2020, where they're down 5% after trading open. Middle East markets have tumbled. The benchmark Brent crude is down nearly 15% over the last 5 days. Dubai financial markets fell 5%. And a lot of the Wall Street titans are freaking the hell out. At least certain ones are. And even the parasites that normally support Donald Trump do not seem happy. Ackman warns of economic nuclear winter from Trump's tariffs. These are the most horrific human beings. I am not quoting Bill Ackman as being a good guy. No, these are the absolute parasitic pieces of human trash that normally are all for what Trump has to do, or what not has to do, what he does. The world faces an economic nuclear winter if President Trump doesn't immediately pause his sweeping reciprocal tariffs. They're not reciprocal. He's just calling them reciprocal. Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman said. The billionaire Ackman, a staunch Trump supporter, put the market's fears about the fate of the global economy in the starkest terms possible. Economic nuclear winter. That's coming from the parasites that actually generally run things. So I'm just kind of, this next thing I'm just telling you as kind of a funny aspect of our media. Our media's job, and, I'm not talking about the right-wing Fox News or whatever, but our mainstream media's job in general is to, they largely dislike Trump, like the CNNs and the MSNBCs. They don't want him doing this. They don't want him harming the stock markets. And so they are very furious. And so in that regard, they are reporting about how bad the stock market is. Oh, my God, this has gone down. This has gone down. The U.S. stock markets have gone down disastrously, all this stuff. But they also, their job is to tell you to keep investing, right? Because Wall Street is a house of cards. And if everyone pulls their money out, it collapses like a dying flan. It's going to collapse. So they need to also tell you, but keep putting money into this ridiculous monstrosity. So here's from CNN Business. Stressful times. This market is scary. Here's why not to pull your money out. So I just wanted to bring you that to show you how pathetic our mainstream media is. That they're going to tell you how bad the Trump is impacting the markets, but they're also going to tell you that keep all your money in there and keep investing in this house of cards. Okay, so the best analysis I've come across, and I spent all day reading all of the things. The best analysis I've come across, and one of the only ones to essentially mention one of the most important factors of this, which I'm amazed it took me, whatever it was, 2 or 3 days to actually put the pieces together and realize how important this is in what's happening. But one of the only sources that I've seen mention the petrodollar is Ben Norton. I don't know if he actually says petrodollar by name, but he talks about the US dollar being the global reserve currency, which is thanks to it being the petrodollar largely. And anyway, Ben Norton has an excellent breakdown of this. I'm going to get into a bunch of it, but he also there's also some things that he does not have in here that I'm going to add as well. But let's do it. Let's dig. Trump's tariff tactics are likely to backfire significantly, fueling high rates of inflation and failing to reindustrialize the U.S., while incentivizing countries around the world to accelerate their search for alternatives to the U.S. and the dollar system, petrodollar system. It's apparently illegal online to say the word petrodollar, which I think is one of the reasons I'm so heavily suppressed, but who knows? And so he's talking about likely to backfire, likely to cause horrific inflation, and of course failing to reindustrialize the U.S. I don't think Trump actually even believes his own garbage about how it's going to reindustrialize the U.S., but who knows? Crazier things have happened. So in the so-called math that Trump and his idiots used to Trump and his team of dwarf hamsters that came up with this economic policy, they gave a little math equation, and one financial journalist points out they didn't actually calculate tariff rates plus non-tariff barriers as they said they did. Instead, for every country, they just took our trade deficit with that country and divided it by the country's export to us. He called the methodology extraordinary nonsense, although it employed Greek letters in the math equation. So basically, they used a bunch of Greek letters to make people think it was complicated math. And yet anybody who actually knows math, I don't. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what a single Greek letter equals. But people who actually know math just looked at it and go, it's just exports minus imports divided by imports times 0.5. That's all it is. And so, but they used a bunch of Greek letters to make it seem important. What this scandal also showed is that the White House spokesmen don't understand the simple formula that they use to determine Trump's tariff rate. Because they said it was something else, and that's not what it was. China is the number one exporter to the U.S., selling us $439 billion in goods in 2024. Now, here's something we'll get into more, but all of those goods are going to go up in price. Tariffs, Trump is acting like tariffs are a tax on those countries, right? Like you increase the tax on the things coming from China and China is upset. Yes, but guess where those products go? For example, they go into Walmart, they go to Amazon, etc. Walmart is then going to have to pay that tariff and on Chinese goods. In order to pay that tariff, they're then going to increase the price for you. So it's not that Walmart gets screwed. It's not really even that China gets screwed. It's largely that you and I get screwed. It's that average Americans are going to be paying a lot more for our products. Most of these costs will be passed on to you and me. And I have not. Later, we'll be getting to the secret reason Trump is doing all of this. Um, the U.S. president, top Chinese exports include phones, computers, electric batteries, machine parts, toys, textiles, everything in your house. That's from China. All of the things you see around you right now from China. They're all going to start costing a lot more if these tariffs remain what they are. The U.S. president likewise targeted Vietnam with a staggering 46% tariff. We only went over there, destroyed their country, killed like 25% of their people or whatever the number is, obliterated every building above one story that Vietnam had. And now we need to get them back with 46% tariffs. Vietnam is the sixth biggest exporter to the U.S., selling $136 billion in goods in 2024. Top Vietnamese exports include computers, phones, furniture, semiconductors, machine parts, microphones, textiles. And he has charts here showing, like, for example, this one is of computers. Almost all of the computers in the United States come from China, Mexico, Chinese Taipei, and Vietnam. Almost all of them. There's a little cutout for, Germany or Netherlands, but Netherlands is 0.9%. So almost all of your electric batteries come from China, South Korea, Japan, Germany, Hungary, and Poland. A little bit from Mexico. Almost all the phones come from Mexico, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Chinese Taipei. So, and again, all the prices on these things are going to go up. And so it's going to screw you and me. It's not. Now, the turmoil in the markets is impacting the rich. And I'll come back to that later. But the actual tariffs, as in the cost that then gets shifted to you and me, that is not going to impact the rich, because the rich don't give a shit if they pay 25 or 45% more on a computer. It is a meaningless amount of money to them. So for the most part, those taxes, these tariffs that Trump is putting on you and me and all of us, that's not going to hit the rich. Prices are expected to markedly increase, not only in consumer goods, but also food. And here's the one that'll hit all of us. The National Coffee Association says we're since coffee cannot grow in most of the United States, except Hawaii and Puerto Rico, 99% of America's coffee is imported from countries that will soon be paying massive taxes on those coffees, and they'll pass that cost all over to you and me. Situation's even starker for fruits and vegetables. Polls show that the poor state of the economy was the most important issue in the 2024 election. Loads of people voted for Donald Trump because they said he's going to fix the economy. All right. Now let's get into the possible reason Trump's doing what he's doing, and I think it is specifically one or two of these, even though there are some other possibilities. But let's go through some of the possibilities. One is to reduce the U.S. current account deficit. The U.S. has a trade deficit. We import far more than we export. So we are not creating these things. We are just consuming these things more so. Using tariffs to try to reduce the U.S. current account deficit does not make sense given the role of the dollar as the global reserve currency, petrodollar. If Trump thinks he can use tariffs to bring the U.S. trade deficit with each country to zero, he clearly has underestimated the ability of other countries to respond with their own tariffs, not to mention to just cut off the U.S. entirely. But this means that Trump's tariffs will cause U.S. exports to those countries to fall, even as their exports to the U.S. fall. Moreover, consumers in countries targeted by Trump's tariff threats, from Canada to France, have vowed to boycott U.S. goods. So none of this is like, it seems like in Trump's magical fantasy, he puts these tariffs on, all these countries immediately go, oh my God, we're going to pay you all that money because what choice do we have? And also we're going to do whatever you want to decrease these tariffs. Anyway, more on that in a moment. But it doesn't seem to be the way most countries are responding. Reindustrialize the United States. So this is possibility number two for why he's doing all this. I think this one's a bit of a farce as well. Every single advanced economy that is industrialized in history has done so with a concerted industrial policy in a state-led industrial upgrading campaign in which the government drove investment into, I don't know, infrastructure, education, key manufacturing sectors, developing human capital, which is kind of a disgusting term, training workers, providing subsidies and cheap loans to strategic firms. Rebuilding U.S. manufacturing would take many years. So if you suddenly cut off, thank you, Latif, for becoming a YouTube member. And I do love super chats, folks. I got to be honest. I do not frown at super chats. Big fan over here. But just a big fan of anything that supports this show, really. Rebuilding the U.S. economy will take many years. So when Trump says he's cutting off or he's putting some crazy tariff on car parts coming from Canada, it's not like the American auto industry is then just able to make all of those car parts. They have to get the manpower. They have to refit all of the factory. Like, it's a process. It can take years. As this says, years, if not decades. It requires, China could do it in 2 days, but the U.S., it takes years. It requires a new enormous investment in infrastructure, the physical construction of large factories, the reshoring of complex global supply chains, and the training of workers. Relying on the private sector alone to do this is totally unrealistic. Okay. The fact that, and then he talks about the fact that the U.S. just doesn't make that much anymore. We're not a big manufacturing country anymore. Instead, one of our biggest industries is private equity. It's flourishing. And Ben Norton says it's the perfect symbol of how U.S. capitalists don't want to create a new company or build new factories because it's too risky and not profitable enough, right? You build a factory, you could make a fair amount of money, but why do that when you can just buy up things and gut them and sell them for parts and far less risky? You don't have to create anything from scratch. It's just, that's where the money is. That's where more money is. So that's where the United States, these, parasites that are at the top of our economy, that's where they go. They are leeches. They want to suck the blood of what's left in our economy. So it's considered too risky. So therefore, the ruling elite can much more easily earn high returns on investment by simply buying up existing companies, laying off all the workers, and asset stripping the companies. That's the entire business model of private equity's infamous corporate raiders who have gotten fabulously wealthy in the neoliberal era. You just buy up a company like Sears, you sell everything it's got, you sell its land, everything else, make a lot of money. Another explanation. So these last two start to get into the two that I believe are actually at the root of what Trump's doing. And both will come back to the petrodollar. Another explanation given for Trump's tariffs is that he hopes to use them as leverage to force countries to come to the negotiating table for a so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord. Now, ignore the stupid name and Trump's stupid, I have a big dick resort down in Florida. It doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter. The point is, Trump wants to force all the countries to the table so that he can do what? So that he can restructure the international financial system, which ironically was designed by the United States at the end of World War II to serve our interests, but which Washington is no longer happy with because we're kind of losing the game, where we no longer have unipolar hegemony. And this is something I've talked about a lot. It's something that gets left out of all of the analyses you'll see on CNN, on MSNBC, on Fox News, on any of them, because they don't want you to know this even exists. They don't want you to know that this is how our socioeconomic system was set up, or our economic system. Initially, they don't want you to know that the U.S. is doing things like creating proxy wars in Ukraine in order to try and ensure that we continue to have hegemony, that we can cut off countries from other countries in order to continue to have our power around the globe. They don't want you to fucking know that. And so they act like this aspect of these decisions, or the motivations, it doesn't exist. They won't even say the words. It's not like they address it and go, nah, that's not what's going on. They act like the word hegemony doesn't exist. They act like the word petrodollar doesn't exist. They rarely even act like the word global reserve currency exists. Occasionally, you'll hear some analyst on CNN go, well, we're not as much the global reserves currency as we used to, but they'll gloss over it in about 2 seconds. And so they really want you to think about none of this. Not just not have the right view on it. They're not even telling you lies about it. They don't want you to know this aspect of all the decisions being made by our government even exists. So to me, that is a giant red blinking light that this is probably the reason that most of these decisions are being made. So Trump wants to force them to the table because we are losing hegemony. He wants to restructure the international financial system. The problem with this idea, Ben Norton says, is that the United States will have to force other countries to violate their own interests on behalf of Washington. All the countries around the world, including that island with just penguins. Now, hopefully the penguins will make the trip to Mar-a-Lago and talk to Trump. I mean, nothing's guaranteed, but those penguins seem reasonable. I think they should come talk to Trump. But Trump is hoping all of the nations around the world will come to him and say, yes, we will agree to a financial system, to an economic global system that benefits you and not us. That's what he's hoping for. Ben Norton says, for so-called allies who have been militarily occupied by the U.S. for decades, like Japan, South Korea, or Germany, this may be possible, although even that is not guaranteed. Basically, for the vassal states, the true vassal states, that the U.S. has regularly forces them to do things that are not in their own interest. I mean, we blew up Germany's Nord Stream pipeline with Russia, and Germany never questioned it. Never said, what just happened? Never even seemed upset by it. In fact, no one supports the Ukraine proxy war more than Germany. So there are countries that we could force to do things that are very bad for them. Germany being one of them, South Korea and Japan are other examples he gives. He continues, but it is highly, highly unlikely that Trump will be able to pressure large countries of global macroeconomic significance like China, Russia, India, or Brazil, basically the BRICS nations, these powerful nations that are going outside of petrodollar hegemony. It is very unlikely he could get those important nations to agree to restructure things in America's benefit. So he starts talking about Chinese exports. He says 14.6% of Chinese exports went to the United States in 2024, but that figure has fallen since 19%. It was 19% in 2018, and it keeps going down. So basically, China is not indebted to the U.S., not nearly the way the U.S. is indebted to China. China only exports 14% of their stuff to the U.S. Ending dependence on trade with the U.S. was one of the key goals of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which was launched in 2013 to create the physical infrastructure needed to economically integrate the global South in post-U.S. world. And that is a key difference of the way China behaves versus the way the U.S. behaves. The U.S. tries to browbeat, physically beat, bomb countries into agreeing to keep being vassal states to the United States and vassal nations. And China instead has made deals with a lot of countries in order to bring them up financially, industrialize them, to bring them out of extreme poverty. And of course, don't forget, China has, and yes, Hirochnu in the comments is saying renegotiating the Bretton Woods Agreement. That is basically what Trump is trying to force, a renegotiation of Bretton Woods. But China was able to take 850 million people of their own people out of extreme poverty over 30 years. 850 million. That's like 2.5 United States worth of people out of extreme poverty. And the U.S. does the opposite. We don't try and bring nations out of poverty. We just try and beat them down to not be able to stand up against us. That's what we do to Syria or Iraq or Libya or even countries that we're not bombing. We're just making sure they can't grow or rise up like Haiti or something. So it really is two completely separate ways of dealing with international relations. In 1944, when the Bretton Woods Conference was held, the United States made up roughly 35% of global GDP. So one country, us, were a third of everything happening in terms of domestic production. A third. It was the world's manufacturing superpower. Today, China represents more than 19% of world GDP compared to less than 15% for the United States. And of course, China has a lot more people. If Donald Trump's goals with his tariffs is to reduce the trade deficit that the U.S. has with the rest of the world, one of the best ways to do that would be to end the role of the dollar as the global reserve currency. Now, this is an aspect I definitely did not know about. Getting into the weeds of these economics is apparently it would decrease our trade deficit if we weren't the global reserve currency. Ben Norton continues, however, Trump is doing the exact opposite of that. The aim of the Mar-a-Lago Accord is to save U.S. dollar dominance by creating a new U.S.-dominated international financial order. Trump is so desperate to preserve the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. currency, and it is a privilege because the U.S., hey, thank you for the donation, Angry Bird, really appreciate it. Angry Bird says, you're my second favorite American. What? Second? Come on. Jesus. Thank you so much, Angry Bird. Love from Scotland. I really appreciate you supporting the show. It means a lot. I'm going to work day and night to become your first favorite American. Okay? I am going to work so goddamn hard. You're not going to believe it. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to get up there to number one, Angry Bird. What was I saying? The privilege of the United States to have the global reserve currency, which is like that because of the petrodollar privilege, means that we can essentially print as much dollars as we want without it losing its power, for the most part. Now, there are limits to that. You couldn't literally print it, $10 trillion tomorrow. But you can go pretty nuts, and our money doesn't lose nearly the amount of power that other countries would lose if they just printed tons of money. Trump is so desperate to preserve the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. currency that he has threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS members simply for being BRICS members. He has said, quote, we will keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Petrodollar. Trump pledged in his 2024 presidential campaign, many countries are leaving the dollar. They're not going to leave the dollar with me. I'll say you leave the dollar. You're not doing business with the United States because we're going to put 100% tariff on your goods. That is what Trump said. He is threatening them with 100% tariffs for trying to get outside of the dollar. But the problem is that he doesn't seem to realize the U.S. is so unstable and so cruel and so bloodthirsty and is committing a genocide in Gaza right now that countries who may view that as a tough thing to swallow, 100% tariffs, that sounds rough. They view that as less painful and less scary than continuing to be owned and controlled by the United States. Trump has claimed that BRICS is dead due to his tariff threats. So he's already claimed BRICS is over. Despite Trump's false claims, however, BRICS continues to expand at the same pace. In January, the Global South-led organization accepted a new member, Indonesia, which is the fourth most populous country in the world. Also the world's seventh largest economy. A few days later, BRICS added a new partner, Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation. So these are large and important countries joining BRICS. BRICS represents 54.6% of the world population and 42% of global GDP. One of the main reasons for this massive deficit, the U.S. trade deficit, is because of the role that the US plays in the world economy as the issuer of the global reserve currency and essentially the banker of the planet. It means that because the dollar is the reserve currency, other countries around the world need to get access to dollars because those are the most powerful currency. How do you get those dollars? The US has to run a trade deficit with other countries. Otherwise, they won't have the dollars they need for the dollar to remain the global reserve currency. Kind of a catch-22, isn't it? This part of the famous Triffin dilemma, which has been popularly discussed for 6 decades, foreign businesses that export products to the US are paid in dollars. The US essentially prints debt. Every dollar we print is debt, right? Because every dollars are created when you loan money. And when you loan money, you expect it back with interest. So you loan $1, you expect $1.05 back. But of course, if you do that with every dollar, there's never enough money to pay it back. Hence why the whole world is deep, deep in debt, because it's literally an impossible cycle. Let's see. So foreign businesses that export products to the U.S. are paid in dollars. The U.S. essentially prints debt and buys those products with that debt. Those dollars go into the bank account of the foreign exporter. Foreign investors then use those dollars to invest in U.S. assets. So foreign countries sitting on a bunch of American dollars, the best thing for them to do for it with that money so that they can make more money is to invest in U.S. assets, buying U.S. stocks, real estate, treasury securities. This causes the capital account to go into surplus. If Trump wants to end the current account deficit, he would also have to end the capital account surplus, which would mean an end to net foreign capital flows into the U.S. This would be catastrophic for Wall Street, one of the main constituencies of billionaire Trump and the fellow billionaires who fill his administration. It appears Trump does not understand the basics of the balance of payments, which is why his contradictory policies make no sense. The real solution to this structural problem would be to move to a different kind of system, like the model that was originally proposed by John Maynard Keynes at Bretton Woods in 1944. Keynes wanted to create an international unit of account called a bancor, whose value would be based on a basket of different commodities and or currencies. This would be supplemented by an international clearing union that could help reduce global trade imbalances by incentivizing surplus countries to increase imports and deficit countries to boost exports. So Keynes' idea did not put the U.S. at the center of the global banking cartel, and the U.S. didn't like that. The more the U.S. pushes nations around, nevertheless, the more they will seek alternatives to the U.S.-led imperial order, which is precisely what has been happening for the past decade. So, as Trump says, it really is this ridiculous catch-22 where Trump's like, you've been seeking alternatives to our petrodollar reserve currency. We're going to slap crazy tariffs on you. We're going to destroy you. And then all the countries go, Jesus Christ, we better seek alternatives to them because they're crazy. So literally, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. You've been seeking alternatives to us. Jesus, we better seek alternatives to them. It really, he's not helping his situation. Trump has publicly stated that he would like to replace income taxes with tariffs. So this is the final reason that Trump is doing this, or I think it's actually a combination of the next one I'm about to say and the one I just covered. I think they're both pretty important in this. Trump has publicly stated he wants to replace income taxes with tariffs. Now, if you think about that, the average American goes, well, that doesn't sound so bad. You know, it means no more income tax, right? Sounds good. And yes, there are all kinds of complaints about income taxes, and many people say they're illegal and they're not in the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a topic for another day. But income taxes are one of the few things in this country that are actually higher, or as a percentage, or not even as a percentage, but higher for the rich than they are for the poor. A single rich person pays, per capita, pays a lot more than a single poor person, even actually not percentage based. So a poor person may pay, or a middle class person may pay 30% of their income taxes. A rich person not going to pay that once you include all the loopholes and everything. But the rich person is going to pay a lot more in taxes, just sheer quantity. It's one of the rare things in the United States that's anywhere like that, where the rich pay more or are screwed more or anything else. But he's attempting to get rid of income taxes, which mostly benefits the rich. Now, if you ignore what tariffs are and you just hear that sentence, replacing income tax with tariffs, and you go, hey, that sounds great. Tariffs are paid by other countries. Income taxes are paid by me. I don't want to pay those. He's getting rid of my income taxes. Awesome. And the tariffs will be paid by the other countries, and everyone's happy except other countries, and screw them. Sounds good, right? The problem is tariffs are not paid by other countries. Tariffs end up being paid by you and me. So you should be terrified. Get it? I'm sure I'm the first to come up with that. So Trump publicly said that he wants to replace income taxes with tariffs. It now seems that he is attempting this with his huge tariffs on other countries. While Trump slashes taxes on the rich and corporations, which he already did in his last administration, he wants to do it again. He hopes to make up for that lost revenue by taxing imports. This will disproportionately hurt the majority of the population, you and me, while benefiting a small handful of wealthy elites. This idea is mathematically illiterate, Ben Norton says, as tariffs could not generate nearly enough revenue to make up for the reduced income taxes. But that has never stopped Trump before. Here's the average tax change that Trump wants to put through Congress. It would be in the year 2026. Everybody in the lower tax brackets would pay more. Some a little more, some a lot more. Then the top 4% would pay $7,000 less. And the top 1%, making over $900,000 a year, would pay $36,000 less a year. Because they really needed that. They make $900,000 a year. They really needed that $36,000. That was really important to them. Tariffs are essentially a tax on consumption. Given the U.S. imports so many consumer goods, tariffs are a regressive tax. And I just discussed this earlier. They burden you and me. They and the poor. They burden the poor the most. They burden people who would use their last money they have in the bank account to try and afford a new phone after their phone breaks. That's the ones who get screwed the most because they have zero in their bank account. They're going to take out a loan or borrow from somebody to get the whatever. It's been a few years since I bought a phone, and I'm sure they've shot up in price, but hundreds of dollars for a phone. Well, now that phone is 25, 50% more expensive. So they go from being completely screwed to being 50% more than completely screwed. So tariffs are Trump's way of imposing an enormous regressive tax, moving the burden of taxation off of capital and onto labor. As of 2018, billionaire families in the U.S. paid a lower tax rate than the bottom half of poor and working class Americans. If Trump's alleged attempts to reindustrialize the U.S. or broker a Mar-a-Lago Accord fail, at the very least, Trump and his billionaire allies will see their taxes significantly reduced, and the burden of taxation will have been moved onto poor and working class Americans. So, and I'm about to get to the part that I feel Ben Norton leaves out, not that he doesn't know it, but you want to look at this, and the rich in our country so far, with Wall Street going down so much, have lost a lot of money. Like the multi-billionaires, because their money is often wrapped up in stock, lost a lot of money. But there's two reasons that Trump and his goons don't seem that concerned right now. One is because of everything we just talked about. They're super worried the U.S. will lose hegemony, will lose the petrodollar reserve currency, and so they're willing to set fire to a lot of shit in order to make sure the U.S. continues to be able to print as many dollars as we want. So that's part of it. Another is that there's actually three reasons. Another is that they're looking to at least have some sort of way they can pretend they're filling the void as they cut taxes for the rich. So they can cut taxes for the rich and say, oh, but we made all that money from tariffs. When, as I've described, that money, that cost is put onto you and me. But here's the final reason that I don't know if I've heard anyone else cover, although I have to admit, my buddy Peter Joseph reminded me of this. And I'm not just name dropping to name drop. I'm also name dropping to say this comes from a legitimate source, a very smart man. But he reminded me of the fact that what happens if the worst happens? What happens if our Wall Street, if the stock market keeps going down and down and down, and businesses start start collapsing? And man, what are we gonna do? What's gonna happen? You know what's gonna happen? Massive giveaway to Wall Street, massive giveaway to the rich. That is what has happened every single time we've seen huge collapses. And the two most recent ones, you guys know it and I know it, 2008 and 2020. The mortgage collapse, housing collapse, and COVID. And what happened during both of those times? The Fed bailed out the richest people in the country. This is from the bailout, the COVID bailout, I'll call it. How the Fed, and it's from American Prospect, how the Fed bailed out the investor class, meaning the rich. Almost all stocks are owned by the top 10%. Without spending a cent, just announcing $4.5 trillion to support securities markets was enough to keep the owners of capital protected from the downsides of the collapse. And here are some of the key points. The CARES Act, that's the stupid name they gave it. The CARES Act appropriated $454 billion to the Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund to be used as an equity stake in a series of Fed credit facilities. You can think of this as similar to a big bank. The ESF stake represents the deposit base, which can absorb any losses from the Fed lending. The Fed can then leverage those deposits up 10 to 1, same as a bank. So you've probably heard of fractional reserve banking. That's what makes our banks so unstable, is you give them $10, they can now loan out $100. So they can loan out $100 to an investor gambling on Wall Street. That's how the mortgage collapse happened, right? They were way out over their skis, as they say. And so when it collapses, the banks don't have the money to cover it. They've loaned out way more than they actually have in their coffers, 10 to 1 fractional reserve. Well, the Fed can do the same thing, and they leverage those deposits 10 to 1. That created a $4.5 trillion with a T money cannon to back up their promises. $4.5 trillion. Here's another key point. As soon as it became clear that the $4.5 trillion slush fund would be created, the equity markets ballooned. The total value of the stock market cratered to 103% of GDP during the COVID collapse, about $21 trillion. But by a month later, it was back up to 136% of GDP, or $29 trillion. By that metric, $7 trillion in stock market wealth was, quote unquote, created in that period because the Fed said, we got your back. We're going to, spend $4.5 trillion to make sure everyone, all the biggest investors are doing fine. This is what kept the U.S. stock market afloat from all just collapsing like the house of cards it is. And this is what they'll do. And so is Trump intentionally creating a collapse to funnel trillions of dollars to Wall Street? I don't know. That's a possibility. Or does he just know that that's a backstop? That as he creates this crazy tariff war with literally the entire world, including the Penguin Islands, he and his goons, he and his crime family figure, worst comes to worst, we call it a national security threat, a collapse, and we have to send trillions of dollars to Wall Street. so that the rich can stay rich. Almost all of that benefit, this is back to the article, goes to the wealthy. The 2017 report showed that about 10% of Americans own 84% of all stocks. So there's two key aspects there that you will not hear anywhere, which is how much this tariff war has to do with the petrodollar and the reserve currency, and how the ruling elite kind of know that if everything collapses, the Fed will bail them out. The Fed will bail out the rich. And let's see. Here's another article about the $1 trillion bailout during COVID. And of course, there was a massive bailout in 2008 as well to bail out the rich, because that's how our system works. So they really have there's no reason for them not to collapse the system. The rich are going to stay rich. The rich might even get richer by collapsing the system. Okay, I got to move on because I did spend a long time on that. Please click thumbs up, click share. I want to get into the protests this weekend and why the largest one, the hands-off protest, was definitely pretty ridiculous. But please, click thumbs up, click share, click subscribe. I am giving away, I've never done this before. I'm giving away more than I've ever given away for free if you become a member for a whopping $6. You can either do that at leecamp.net, my locals community, or you can do it at patreon.com/leecamp. If you join up, not only will you get the normal exclusive segments, exclusive interviews, all that stuff, but you get my ebook, Dangerous Ideas. You get my ebook, Bullet Points and Punchlines. You get my Zoom comedy special, Not Enough Friends to Bury a Body. You get my Zoom comedy special, Laughing All the Way to the Shitstorm. And you get my Zoom comedy special, Fear of Death and Other Small Matters. All of that will be emailed to you after you join up. And and if you, it may take a couple days to get it all to you, but all that's for supporting this show at either leecamp.net or patreon.com/leecamp. Also, if you haven't checked it out, the new Unredacted Tonight, people have been big fans. It's done very well. This last episode, the opening segment is on all the evidence that Israel knew what was going to happen on October 7th. And at minimum, allowed it to happen. I try to put all that evidence together into 10 minutes. I'm going to play a minute right now, just so you can see what you're missing. And then I'll just play 1 minute and then I'll come back out of it. But this is what you're missing if you refuse to watch Unredacted Tonight. What are you thinking? You're living life wrong. You're doing it wrong. You're just doing it all wrong. Welcome to Unredacted Tonight. I'm the most censored comedian in America, Lee Camp, and I'm done doing this voice for now. We all know that Hamas committed the October 7th, 2023 attack in Israel, killing 1,200 Israelis. Well, as covered on a previous episode, we know that the IDF actually killed hundreds of those Israelis, so 1,200 is a completely false number. But who cares about reality? Last I checked, it's overpriced, overhyped, and doesn't look nearly as good once you get its clothes off. But let's ignore the 1,200 number. What about everything else that happened that day? Do we know the truth? The media tells us that Hamas surprised Israel and committed this massacre out of the blue with no forewarning. Do I really need to say forewarning? Aren't all warnings are forewarnings? A post-warning is not, it's not a warning at all. It's just being a dick. Like someone gets attacked by a squirrel and then afterwards you yell, "Watch out for that squirrel!" You're just an asshole. Anyway, is it true that Israel... Okay. Just wanted to show you what you're missing. It's all at leecamp.net. leecamp.com/unredacted. I'll put that on the screen here real quick. That'll take you to the full playlist of all the shows. leecamp.com/unredacted. And if you prefer articles, columns, I also put it out as a column on my Substack. It just went up today. That Substack is substack.com/@realleecamp, the @ symbol. Substack.com/@realleecamp. And if you prefer columns because they're easier to share with people, maybe you got readers in your family or your fan groups. If you got readers in there, you can send them the reading version. So check that all out. But leecamp.com/unredacted is the main list of all the episodes of Unredacted. Obviously, a new one coming up Thursday. Okay, I got to get to this before we wrap up, though. There were major protests this weekend. One of them was to stop the genocide in Gaza, and that was in several cities. I think the biggest presence was in Washington, D.C. But another one that was far bigger, I think, in terms of number of people present, was these hands-off protests that you probably saw mention of. They were even talked about on mainstream media. Hands off. And it said, and some of these, most of these things I agree with. Hands off Medicaid, hands off Medicare, hands off Social Security, hands off our jobs, hands off our wallets, hands off our bodies, hands off fair elections. Where do you think you've got fair election? Where are you? Are you in Venezuela? What fair? Where are there fair elections? Okay. Personal data, hands off public lands. By the way, Biden allowed more drilling on public lands than Trump did. Fun fact. Hands off veteran services, hands off cancer research, and then they sneak in there right in the middle, hands off NATO. Yeah, hands off our war-making cult that puts us on the brink of nuclear war. Don't touch that. Don't get in the way of that. Don't get in the way of our militarized partnership of let's try and create war, either Cold War or hot war with Russia constantly. Please don't interrupt that. I mean, why the fuck would you put NATO on this list if you wanted this to mean anything? And then it says hands off immigrants. Well, that would have been nice during the Democrats as well, wouldn't it? Hands off free speech. Man, that would have been nice during the Democrats administration as well, too, huh? And as well, too, by the way, that's my new expression. But you'll also notice what isn't anywhere on this list. We are all coming together in the millions to fight against Trump, to stop the worst of what Trump's doing. And what's not on this list? Gaza, Palestine, anywhere. Nope. Don't touch it. Don't worry about that. Not a concern. We're just committing a genocide day by day that's live streamed on our goddamn phones. But, let's not mention that. And that's what makes, and see, here's the thing, I agree with a lot of these, but that's what makes this a pathetic neoliberal bullshit protest. Nowhere do they mention Gaza, but they do mention NATO. There's room, by the way, same number of letters. They could have replaced NATO with Gaza. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe someone wrote it up, put Gaza in there, and someone else came behind them, scratched out those 4 letters, put in NATO. But it's just pathetic. It's pathetic. You cannot have a protest like this and ignore the U.S.-backed genocide that has killed hundreds of thousands. It's just grotesque. However, there were many protests against the ongoing U.S.-Israel genocide in Gaza, and I thought this video was very powerful. This is them at the protest unraveling a sheet of paper that has all the names of the dead, of those murdered by Israel, and the names, for those of you listening to the podcast, the names are listed in like a 2-point font. I mean, tiny, tiny. And yet this piece of paper goes on for miles.
I remember the image of Ismail al-Ghul when he was beheaded by an American bomb. And the only thing that stayed was...
And that insane list of names is just the ones they've identified. And in case you're wondering, this video is not on loop. This is just the video. It has not started replaying. It's like you cannot imagine what And this isn't the people that have died from famine, died from disease, which Israel uses as weapons. This is just the 50,000 who are known, who have been murdered by Israel in a year and a half. And you can't imagine what that looks like, what that number of people, you can't even fathom what that number of people actually is. Okay, some updates on what's been going on in Israel and Gaza. This is from Haaretz, which is kind of like Israel's New York Times. Occasionally they'll print something worthwhile, but a lot of times they're running cover for Israel. Egypt has presented a new ceasefire proposal between Israel and Hamas. So this is yet another ceasefire that Hamas will probably agree to. And Israel just doesn't agree to anything or pretends to agree and then pretends Hamas changed it when they didn't. So these ceasefires keep being agreed to by Hamas, but Israel just ignores them or doesn't partake really. Another important news story: Leary Albog, an IDF spotter. So I covered the IDF spotters actually on this latest redacted and unredacted tonight, which they're the ones whose job it is to like watch the fence. And thank you, Jay Tolbert, for donating over on Rumble. By the way, everyone subscribe, rumble.com/Lee Camp. Jay Tolbert says people waved Ukrainian flags at the rallies and NATO supports Ukraine, so it's no surprise. Fun fact, that doesn't surprise me. They were waving Ukrainian flags. But the spotters were the ones in charge of watching the fence, and they had been trying to tell people for years, literally 2 years. They said Hamas is training to attack the fence, and they would put these reports in every day, and Israel just ignored all of it because they wanted it to happen. They were actually setting things up for it to happen, which is latest episode of Unredacted tonight. I cover all that. But so this is one of the spotters who survived, which there are not many that survived. Most of the spotters were killed. But anyway, Leary Albog, IDF spotter, released from Hamas captivity in January, told Israel's public broadcaster that if she met Netanyahu, I guess he's refusing to meet with her, would tell him that she went through the worst thing a human being can ever go through, and you are to blame. You are to blame for everything, and you have to fix what you did. So this is a real pro-Israeli person in the IDF, captured by Hamas, gets freed, and says Netanyahu is to blame. And there's a fair number of Israelis who understand that this is Netanyahu's death and destruction. But of course, it's not just him. He actually represents a significant portion of the Israeli ruling elite who want to ethnically cleanse Gaza, create greater Israel, etc. Two people in Gaza. Two people. One of them, a journalist, were killed in an Israeli strike. You'll notice the way Haaretz phrases it. They don't say Israeli murdered two journalists. Israeli strike on a tent belonging to the Palestine Today news agency in Khan Yunis. So Palestine Today is living in tents because the buildings have been all blown up, and they bombed the tents. The Palestinian Civil Defense, a group affiliated with Hamas's interior ministry, reported. The health ministry also said that 56 people were murdered in Gaza and 137 wounded in 24 hours. The numbers we're seeing right now are like back from day 2 of, after October 7th. Like, Israel is just murdering a crazy number of people constantly. And so there was a week ago, they killed, I think, 300 in 2 days. And last night it was 56 in 24 hours. And again, this is just the ones we know about. This is not the ones who die from famine or disease. Just breathtakingly horrific. I want to bring to your, speaking of journalists, I want to bring to your attention this effort, especially if you are with a media outlet, an independent media outlet, or you know someone who is, or you have contact with someone who is. I wanted to bring this effort to your attention, wherever it is. Thank you, Chuck, for becoming a member. Much love, Chuck. All right. Why am I having so much trouble finding this? Okay. Thank you. So this is a group of Movement Media Alliance, and one special person, Eleanor Goldfield, is a member, and she wrote. It was a group effort, but she wrote a lot of this this notice. And it's a call to protect Palestinian reporters and end media complicity in genocide, a call to all journalists and media workers. And I'm going to read just a little of it. According to a new report from the Cost of War study, Brown University, Israel's genocide has killed at least 232 reporters. It surpasses the combined toll of journalist casualties in the U.S. Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Yugoslav wars, the war in Afghanistan, and the ongoing war in Ukraine. The combined number, it's more than the combined number. Since October 7th, 2023, Israel has refused to allow foreign journalists access to Gaza. Thanks to the remarkable work of Palestinian journalists on the ground, all of whom Israel has displaced, injured, starved, and surveilled, much of the world has seen Israel's brutality and genocidal violence, despite the attempts by Israel and the West to block and kill the truth. Just as the work of Movement Media Alliance is to collaborate and amplify each other's work of independent grassroots media, our mandate right now must be to stand in solidarity with Palestinian journalists as our colleagues and fellow human beings by wielding our media tools in direct resistance to Israel's campaign of violent erasure. This means using our platforms not to overwrite voices, but to amplify them, not to validate their work, but to demand justice. It means pushing for Palestinian narratives. On March 24th, Israel targeted and murdered Hassam Shabbat as he traveled on a horse cart in Gaza. On the same day, barely an hour earlier, Israel targeted and murdered journalist Mohammed Mansour in his home. As Hassam wrote in a post in June 2024, language is important. Language makes genocide justifiable. A reason why we were still being bombed after 243 days is because of the New York Times and most Western media. They continue to spread misinformation and are willing to jump many hoops instead of stating that Israel's committing genocide or that Israel's killing Palestinians daily. The New York Times is complicit in this genocide. The New York Times has the blood of 15,000 Palestinian children on their hands. Obviously, that number was 15,000 way back in June when he wrote that. But Israel has now murdered the journalist who wrote that. As Western movement journalists, we have an obligation and an existential need to decry the dangerous failings of corporate media. We must see the attacks on journalists in Gaza as inextricably linked to the attacks on our press freedoms here in the U.S., as they are unilateral attacks on truth, access, awareness, and humanity. And then it says, we the undersigned. So basically, if you're with an independent outlet or you have a show or you know someone who have a show, they can sign on to this letter. And it is a pretty awesome group of people to be a part of that group. Thank you, Alvaro, for joining up. Really appreciate you supporting the show. We demand that Western media recognize the fact-checked, investigated, and undeniable evidence that Israel, as backed by the U.S. and colonial powers, is perpetrating genocide against Palestinians, and that the baseline of journalistic integrity requires us to show that truth. As Palestinian journalist Ibrahim said in a press conference outside Nasser Hospital, he said the international community must uphold its responsibility toward Palestinian journalists and impose the maximum penalty on these criminals who target us and our families. As movement media workers in solidarity with our colleagues in Palestine, we must not only aim to elevate journalistic work that exposes injustice and colonial violence, but also use our voices to ensure their safety and the well-being of all oppressed peoples. So yeah, pretty awesome statement. That's at movementmedia.org. I'll put the link in the chat there. Movement-media.org. That's probably important. movementmedia.org. And we'll wrap up here by playing a clip of this is our State Department, and they're forced to answer about Israel murdering aid workers, and it's kind of amazing. Our State Department, they're just like totally wonderful and moral people, and they said this is absolutely wrong, and I think everyone who murdered those aid workers should be in The Hague, and we're going to give the entire weight and breadth and power of the U.S. government to make sure that everyone who murdered those aid workers and dumped them in a mass grave is locked up or maybe executed if we have the time. And that's what they said. Isn't that crazy? Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else. Here's what they said.
All right. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
On Gaza, the UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office has said that 15 paramedics, civil defense, and a UN worker were killed, in their words, one by one by the IDF. They have dug bodies up, they said, in a shallow grave that have been gathered up, and also vehicles in the sand. Have you got any assessment of what might have happened, and given the potential use of American weapons, is there any assessment of whether or not this complied with international law?
Well, I can tell you that for too long, Hamas has abused civilian infrastructure, cynically using it to shield themselves. Hamas's actions have caused humanitarians to be caught in the crossfire. The use of civilians or civilian objects to shield or impede military operations is itself a violation.
Which, of course, is hilarious because Israel regularly uses human shields, literally straps people to the front of their Jeeps. So this is all garbage and laughable. But anyway.
Of international humanitarian law. And of course, we expect all parties on the ground to comply with international humanitarian law.
Oh, you expect all parties on the ground to abide by international humanitarian law? Then why not hold to account the one party that of those two parties that you heavily fund and that you send bombs to every 36 hours? How about you hold them to account? Yeah, you might not be able to hold Hamas to account right now because Hamas is not U.S. funded. But the other ones, you could, huh?
But there's specifically a question on it's a question about accounting and accountability, given it may have been the use of U.S. weapons. So it's a question about the State Department rather than Hamas. Is there any action?
Well, every single thing that is happening in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. Every single dynamic.
And of course, that is one of those childish arguments. It's like arguing with a 3-year-old or something. It'd be like if someone, broke your toy and you then said, it's like let's say they broke your toy intentionally, benefit of the doubt. They took your toy, pick it up, snapped the head off the figurine, and you then burned their house down, killing their dog. And you said, let's just remember everything that has happened is your fault. And they say, you burned my house down, you killed my dog. And they said, oh, I'm not done. And then they blew up your car, and then they went to your place of work and accused you of sexual assault. And they just kept going, let's remember, everything is your fault for the thing you did. It's just a absolute idiotic, simplistic, dumb argument to say we can do whatever we want. We can commit mass genocide of 200,000 people because of October 7th. It's horrific and morally repulsive.
I'll say again, I've said it, I think, in every briefing. All of this could stop in a moment if Hamas returned all the hostages and the hostage bodies they are still holding and put...
Two things here. One is, she doesn't mention the 10,000 hostages Israel's holding. But besides that, it's actually not true that it could all stop in 1 minute if Hamas released a hostage. Because Israel, and this was in the early days, this was like a month in, Israel announced they would not stop their assault even if Hamas released all the hostages. It wouldn't stop. So, just straight up lies.
Put down its weapons. There is one entity that could stop it for everyone in a moment. And that is Hamas.
Nope, not true. There is one entity that could stop it. That is true. Israel. Israel could stop this genocide immediately and now and forever. But of course they won't, because they wanted this to happen. They murdered hundreds and hundreds of their own people on October 7th. And they're achieving what they wanted to achieve in terms of utterly obliterating Gaza and ethnically cleansing it. And this is our morally bankrupt State Department. And this is also why we need a sociopath test, okay? Sociopath test for all. All right, I will see you. So for those of you who don't know, a slight time change. And again, I apologize for the time change, but it's so I can achieve Unredacted tonight for you guys. The next scheduled live stream is 3 p.m. Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, Friday, noon Pacific. So Monday and Friday always stay the same, 3 p.m. Eastern. But the third one of the week will be various times when it's best. It might be on Wednesday. It might be jumping off of a breaking news story. And I will do my best to let everyone know. So keep an eye out. But I would love for you, because YouTube could ban my channel at any time, one of the most important things you can do in case that happens is make sure you're on my email list. You can sign up at leecamp.com. You can also sign up by texting the word unredacted, one word, unredacted, to 33777. And you can also follow me on all of my platforms. Linktree.com/LeeCamp should take you to all of them. So you should try and follow me on a lot of different platforms in case I get banned. I've already had one of my YouTubes banned around the world, had one of my Spotify shows banned around the world, had my TikTok banned around the world. So it's basically follow me on all my platforms, and hopefully some of them don't get banned. Thanks a lot. And I will see you in the coming days. Keep fighting.
Well, brother, I salute you, though, man. You're one of the few that bring together this tremendous artistic talent and still be in such deep solidarity with oppressed people.
It's an honor to be here because I'll tell you, Lee, you have one of the funniest shows on television, bar none.
It's an enormous pleasure to be here. While I was waiting, I was leafing through your wonderful book.
The same to you. I love your show. Be happy to come back anytime.
Lee, this is one of the great honors of my long career, just to be in the same earth with you.
I'm sure.
We're just so blinded. We have so many blinders on because our society doesn't want us to know things. And so it takes shows like your show, and
it is clearly designed to eradicate.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, Jill, how are you? Julian, thanks for joining me. Honor to have you, brother.
Consumerism is a theory that people should behave this way to help each other. It's not.
Mr. George Galloway, thank you so much for joining me in these dark times.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you so much, Lee, for having me on. Keep fighting. Ha ha.